It is Keon Ellis time. It is time to talk about the bright spot of last season for the Sacramento Kings, Keon Ellis. From going undrafted 2 seasons ago to not playing much his rookie season, playing in the G League, to being on a two-way contract, to all of a sudden being thrust into the starting lineup. I remember when he first got his start early in the season when Fox was out because we just couldn't beat the Rockets and the team was playing so poorly, and it was like, wait, what? Keon Ellis in the starting lineup? Like, is that right? Or is that a mistake? Like, no, that was right. And so he was just such an exciting and fun storyline from last season. And I think every team, just in sports in general, you always want to have like one or two of those like really fun storylines and or players to kind of latch onto for a season to really enjoy that season. And I think 2 years ago for the Kings, it was just everything. Like everything was the bright spot, and that is so rare. And we may never see that again. That original Beam Team season. The only other time that something like that might happen is when the Kings like win a championship. But even then, it might not be as fun as it was 2 seasons ago. But last season, Keon Ellis was definitely like probably the top storyline for the Kings, and the most fun part was seeing him really latch onto a starting spot, because this was a guy that we had just hoped would be a rotational player at some point in his career, going undrafted. And then all of a sudden he's starting games and he's playing well and he's knocking down all these threes in important games. And so it was very fun. I think every season there's like one or two teams that just have like no good storylines like this, and those are the depressing teams. And the Kings maybe could have even been in that category if Keon Ellis hadn't done what he did, because it would have been a depressing season if Herter and Monk go down with the injuries that they did and Keon Ellis wasn't the player that he was. Then it would have still been Chris Duarte getting those minutes. And so Keon kind of saved us last season. And it was just so fun because NBA draft Twitter, I feel like there's sections of draft Twitter and Kings draft Twitter that just hypes up like every player. And I love that because I love the positivity, sees that star potential in every player. And Keon Ellis was especially one of those guys for Kings draft Twitter before he even got signed to the Kings. And so that makes it even more fun to see what he's doing now with the Kings. Before we get into the rest of this player preview, as always, if you enjoy my content, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, comment, and shout out to Cody Willis for supporting the channel and being a member. You too can become a member and support the channel and get cool badges to go along with it. So let's get into the rest of this Keon Ellis player preview. Obviously, last season was the dream scenario from a Keon Ellis perspective, from the way he performed. But I think one thing that we need to remember is that he has played 73 games in his career, averaged about 14 and a half minutes per game in those 73 games. This is a small sample size between 2 seasons, the first season where he barely even played. We just have to keep that in mind, because if he comes into this next season and plays exactly how he did last season, we will take that every single time. The Kings will be in such a good spot if he can just replicate what he did last season. But because it is a small sample size, he's played less than a full season in his career, we need to like take a step back, because I know everyone loves Keon Ellis and they're like, he's got to start. And in the beginning, like from the start of the season, I agree, like he should be the starter going in over Malik Monk, over Kevin Herter, because of what he provides on the defensive end. And also he's shot like 42% from three in his career so far. Again, 73 games. But because of that small sample size, there's always the possibility that he comes into this next season and he just isn't as good as he was last season. And that could happen for multiple different reasons. I mean, what made him so good was he was shooting 42% from three on his career. Last season it was 41.7% on 2.9 attempts per game. And then obviously from a defensive perspective, he averaged almost a steal per game, and that was in only 17 minutes per game. Was great when it came to getting deflections, and it felt like he took so many tough assignments where every time you're like, okay, this is the guy that's kind of gonna get him. And he stepped up to the task so many times. I mean, really the only thing that you can really say is he got in foul trouble sometimes, especially against like SGA, or there was that one play at the end of the Knicks game where Brunson blew by him because he looked for the screen. Like there were a few kind of rookie young player moments, but for the most part he was just up to the task defensively. On the offensive end, obviously knocking down the three, but also getting to the mid range and making the right passes. Like it felt like he could do no wrong. And now that he's going into this next season where from the very beginning there's going to be expectations, he's going to be getting a good amount of playing time, you would think. There's probably going to be a little bit more of the ups and downs this season. I mean, every time we watched him last season, at least for me, it's like I just kept expecting the decline in his 3-point percentage just because what he was doing was so incredible, but he never dropped off from three. But now teams know about him. They know what he's about. And that's not to say they're going to like game plan around him and key in on him. Like, no, of course they're not, because teams are going to be game planning around Sabonis and Fox and DeRozan. And so obviously he's still in a spot where he's a role player that's not going to get a lot of attention, and that's good for him offensively. But teams are going to know that you can't just keep going under him on dribble handoffs where he'll just stop behind the screen and pop a three and make them at a good percentage. Teams are going to understand that, you want to force him all the way to the rim because he doesn't necessarily love finishing at the rim. He likes stopping in that mid range. Teams are going to understand that from a defensive perspective, he's going to reach, he's prone to foul trouble, and they're going to understand that they can use strength to exploit him, because that was my biggest thing, my biggest worry for him when the Kings signed him was his size. He's a very skinny dude. Last season we didn't see that get exploited very often. He's long, and so he gets his hands on a lot of things, but we didn't really see that size get exploited. And I think even in summer league a little bit, you saw the strength getting exploited a little bit more. And so I think that could be one worry, especially if he's going to be asked to guard up a little bit, because we all know about the Kings' defensive wing problem. And so that could lead to him guarding up a little bit, especially if the Kings go to 3-guard lineups like they did last season. Last season, there were plenty of times where, it's Fox, it's Monk, and then it's like Davion or Keon. And there are just a bunch of guards. Like now, McLaughlin replacing Davion, and Kevin Huerter's still going to be there, and Devin Carter when he comes in. So there may be those times when he's asked to guard up, and that probably is where you will see the strength getting exploited. And so, like I said, I think he deserves the starting spot to start the season. But I think the things that could possibly see him lose that starting spot, or just have his minutes get decreased and not necessarily lose the starting spot, but just maybe not being in closing lineups, because that's a whole nother thing, are one, just his 3-point percentage. I mean, that goes for almost anyone, or at least any role players. Like if you're not hitting threes and your role is to hit threes on the offensive end and you're not doing it, you're going to see those minutes go down. But foul trouble is going to be a big one for him. He's got to be able to stay on the court if he wants that starting spot, because if he's going to be playing more minutes now, that's less fouls to use. Before, there were times where, he was playing less because there were just less expectations of him last season. So he could kind of come in, and if he picked up a few quick fouls, it didn't matter because he was never going to be playing a lot of minutes. He was never going to be in the closing lineups. Now that might matter because we need him late in games defensively for certain matchups. I think we'll see the Kings go with different closing lineups this season. I mean, I think there are 4 players that are locked in, and we all know who they are. But then I think just depending on the matchup, is it Monk? Is it Keon Ellis? If Kevin Herter's having an amazing shooting game and you don't need that defensive presence, is it him? Could the Kings slide up and go with Trey Lyles at some points? That seems less likely just with DeRozan, and you don't want 2 guys that are going to get burned on the perimeter with neither of them even being the center. So that probably won't happen, but you never know. And then I think the other question is like, is there more to his offensive game? Because he's looked like a great offensive player. He's never looked really like a primary ball handler, but he's looked really good in terms of his decision making off of the catch. He just never really seemed to be fazed by any pressure. I mean, now the pressure's really on him though, but he never seemed fazed by it. So hopefully that continues. So can he continue to make good decisions off the catch, but then also maybe expand on it? Because like I said, if teams know what he likes to do, if they get a sense of that, if they've played him a couple times, he needs to be able to have multiple moves and counters. So we know he can just catch and shoot the 3. We know he can step into the mid-range and knock down a shot pretty comfortably. We've seen a little bit of his floater, but not a lot. And so like, can he really develop that floater? Can he develop ways of finishing around the rim or getting to the rim and making plays out of that? Could we see a little bit more of him as a movement shooter? The way he shoots and his mechanics, it doesn't really seem like he's ever going to become a movement 3-point shooter to me. He's very good when he's just set and is able to go through his stroke. I don't really see him being a movement 3-point shooter, but those are the types of things. It's like, can he kind of surprise us and even expand his game more on the offensive end? Because he's shown glimpses of being a very good offensive player, even though the focus is on the defensive side of the ball. If he was just a defensive player, then he would have really never gotten the starting spot, and he would have been relegated more to a Davion Mitchell role. But it is his offensive game that elevated his role so much. And that's going to be very important when it comes to if he can be in those closing lineups. Can he make the right play when the game is on the line? I'm very high on Keon as an offensive player, and I think he'll be able to maintain what he's been doing defensively, but I do think we just need to be prepared for maybe some more ups and downs, especially from his 3-point shooting, because of the small sample size that we've seen from him. But the great part about the Kings roster is that they got plenty of guys that can play in his place. Really, none of which at this point can do what he does defensively. And so that's what he has going for him, and that's why I think he should start. But still, if he's not playing well, he will be replaced very quickly. And it would be even more so if Devin Carter was healthy from the get-go, but he's not. So that makes Keon Ellis even more important because he's the only, defensive guard with his length that we have. Jordan McLaughlin's a good defender, but he's just so small. And so there's kind of like 2 sides of it. 1, there's plenty of guards that can take Keon's spot, but 2, there's no guards at the moment that can do what he does on both sides of the ball. And so that's why he's so important for the Kings and could be a big decider of how good this Kings team can be. So I'm very excited about year 3 of Keon Ellis, but really like the first full year where coming into the start of the season, we're expecting him to contribute. And so that is it for this episode of the Roll Report with this player preview. Let me know who you guys want next. Trey Lyles, Alex Len, Jordan McLaughlin, somebody else. And I will see you guys then. Peace.